From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. Tropical storm Dorian lost some of its maximum sustained wind speed as it crossed Barbados late on Monday, but some communities were left without electricity and water. Tropical storm warnings remain in effect for Martinique, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as the storm now heads for Puerto Rico. Our correspondent in Bridgetown, Kareem Smith, has details.
The greatest impact of Tropical Storm Dorian was expected to affect Barbados around 8 on Monday night, but according to most reports, the strongest winds were felt at around about 11 or just before midnight. Overnight, there were a very few strong gusts of wind and there were a few showers as well, but certainly not enough to cause major damage. In fact, as Dorian passed over Barbados, it started to weaken significantly, with wind speeds decreasing from about 60 miles per hour and coming down to just about 45 miles per hour. Nevertheless, some communities in the eastern part of the country are out of electricity at this time and others without water. However, utility companies are working feverishly to restore it as soon as possible. There have also been a few reports of fallen trees which are blocking a couple roadways at this time. The tropical storm warning was discontinued at around 2 a.m., but the national shutdown imposed by Prime Minister Mia Mottley is still very much in effect after almost 18 hours. Government has also approved an operational clearance to allow utility companies and security and emergency forces to assess any damage that may have occurred overnight. And meanwhile, operations at the country's main ports of entry are back to work as usual. So for the most part, it seems Barbados has been spared the worst of Tropical Storm Dorian as the weather system takes aim at the neighboring island of St. Lucia.
That was Kareem Smith from Bridgetown. In the last few hours, Dorian has been approaching St. Lucia from the southeast. Ahead of the storm, Prime Minister Alan Chastanet announced a national shutdown of the country.
Just concluded a NEMAC meeting at 1 o'clock today. The update from the Met Office is that the storm Dorian is now going to be at least a Category 1 hurricane when it hits St. Lucia at 2 a.m. tomorrow morning. That's on Tuesday morning. And again, everybody has been asked to be in their homes by 6 p.m. today and to prepare yourselves. As a result of that, we have announced that we're going to officially close the country as of 6 p.m. today. So that means that everyone should be home, all businesses should be closed by 6 p.m. Today. With us were representatives of the Chamber of Commerce and also of the public sector. So the only officials that will be out after 6 p.m. would be that of essential services. I'm asking all St. Lucians to adhere to the notices given only by NEMO. So this is an official notice by NEMO that we're shutting down the country as of 6 p.m. People would be allowed to go back out once an all clear notice has been given by NEMO. I want to repeat that there is no such thing as a partial clearance. It can only be an official all clear, and the only entity that can issue that is NEMO. In order to facilitate the public, we do have an app, cap.cap, which is a free download, which will give you official updates from NEMO.
Puerto Ricans are also bracing themselves for the storm. On Monday afternoon, Dorian was blowing maximum sustained winds of 95 kilometers per hour, about 155 kilometers east-southeast of Barbados. The Miami-based National Hurricane Center says it is expected to be a hurricane when it passes near Puerto Rico and eastern Hispaniola around Wednesday. In 2017, Hurricane Maria killed more than 3,000 people in Puerto Rico, as the island is still grappling with the devastation left behind.
I would like the Puerto Rican people to, first of all, stay calm. Albeit the emergency,
I'd like people to move on with their plans calmly. The people and the heads of the agencies have been preparing for the last 2 years. Maria's experience taught us all a big lesson, not only for us, the people at a personal level, but for the Puerto Rican government as well.
The Brazilian government has rejected aid pledged by G7 countries to fight raging fires in the Amazon. On Monday, the cabinet head of Jair Bolsonaro's government said that while they were grateful for the offer, those resources could be better used for the reforestation of Europe. French President Emmanuel Macron had previously announced that G7 countries would provide $20 million in aid to fight fires in the Brazilian Amazon. Thousands of fires have been raging for 23 days now, destroying large portions of the rainforest. Residents of the Brazilian city of Rio Branco, one of the worst affected by the smoke caused by the wildfires, have raised concerns about the impact of the smoke on their health.
These fires have had a huge impact on the health of the people, the elderly, children, and it has been very disruptive to our breathing. It has caused many difficulties in breathing, and this hasn't been good for society.
For years and years, we have suffered from fires and smog, not only here in Brazil, but also in other countries like Peru and Bolivia, which have burned for years, which is usual.
And Bolivia is also still dealing with massive fires in its Amazon region. At the Pantanal de Otuquis National Park, over 160,000 hectares have been lost to fires this year alone. For their part, the Bolivian government has stepped up efforts to fight the fires using multiple firefighting planes, including a 747 supertanker, the largest firefighting aircraft in the world.
The Otuquis National Park is facing fire that is practically out of control. This year, 160,000 hectares have been affected by fire, and in these past 10 days, 90,000 trees have been lost.
Everything has been burned. There is no vegetation left. As you can see, the only vegetation remaining is this. The rest has been completely lost. There are dead animals, lost vegetation, and trees that have been completely burned.
In Peru's Apurimac region, local residents used brooms, shovels, and branches to fight back advancing fires at the Ampai Natural Reserve. The country's civil defense says that over 140 hectares of forest have already been burnt. The country is reportedly battling nearly 150 fires in this year's dry season. Outside of the Amazon region itself, one of the areas worst hit by wildfires is on the border between Paraguay and the Brazilian state of Mato Grosso do Sul. This is also a region dominated by large-scale soya farmers. Many of the blazes had been brought under control, only to break out again.
Dry winds from the north, on top of an ongoing drought, have restarted wildfires in the Tres Gigantes Forest Reserve. On top of this, the wetland region is increasingly being threatened.
We are seeing small hotspots appearing throughout Paraguay's wetlands, and conditions are primed for the spread of fires. Humidity is low. There's a lot of dry vegetation and high winds.
Paraguay shares a border with both Bolivia and Brazil, as well as the largest tropical wetland region in the world. In this area, close to 21,000 hectares of forest have already been consumed.
This particular region is called the Palmar Savanna. This ecosystem is usually full of life, but now it's been suffering from a drought, which is being made worse due to the fires.
The Guira Paraguay Association, which is in charge of the Tres Gigantes Forest Reserve, continues to monitor the damage caused to the region.
We are doing daily monitoring of areas that are in high danger of fires. The drought season extends through July, August, and September.
Meanwhile, the National Emergency Ministry set up an operation center where authorities are organizing all efforts to put out the growing hotspots.
An agricultural emergency has been declared in 17 areas of central Chile as the worst drought in decades affects the region. Our correspondent in Santiago, Paola Dracnich, has more.
The Mapuche community, specialists and social movements have warned of an imminent water crisis in Chile for years. The government has finally recognized the crisis, declaring an agriculture emergency in 17 areas in the center of the country, assigning resources to animal needs and sending water in vans. However, they haven't said anything about the waters law, which has meant the privatization of water in Chile, putting it in the hands of mining and big agriculture businesses. This water crisis was predicted years ago, and dozens of towns across the country are completely without water. This year, the government has been making some efforts to counter the problem, but only to assist, rather than change the law that has allowed the little water left, as a consequence of climate change, to stay in private hands.
Paula Dragnich from Chile. More stories coming up. Thousands flee from Cameroon's Anglophone area, expecting violent clashes. Don't go away.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. The Mexican government's program to protect human rights activists and journalists is in need of additional funding. This is due to a record number of people who are requesting protection due to widespread violence in the country.
Currently, about 976 people who have received threats are under the protection of Mexico's mechanism to defend human rights activists and journalists. But the measures included in this mechanism are often deemed insufficient.
These are reactive measures with few cautionary steps, and it doesn't even protect people on a national level. Only those who are included in the mechanism, since we know they have received threats because we have been notified by an organization or we learned about it through our own monitoring.
According to official figures, the number of people requesting protection has increased by 172% compared to 2018. If this trend continues, about 3,400 people could be enrolled in the program by 2024.
This protection mechanism is the only tool that the Mexican government has to guide its agencies and governing bodies in creating a system capable of reversing this wave of violence, which has pushed this country into impunity.
According to a new United Nations report, at least 11 reporters have been killed so far this year across Mexico. Nonetheless, a new case happened on August 24th. The body of Navis commander, director of a local news site, was found with multiple stab wounds.
Apart from the direct and indirect victims as a result of violence against journalists, the situation also affects reporters and the media in other ways, such as self-censorship and the decision of avoiding talking about certain issues due to possible attacks against them.
The UN report shows that at least 13 human rights activists have also been killed so far this year. The list includes environmental activists such as Nora Lopez, who worked with endangered bird species and was killed in the state of Chiapas on August 21st.
We have a proposal for a national campaign led by the presidency to reward the work of human rights activists and journalists.
The decision to improve and ensure the efficiency of the mechanism to protect human rights defenders and journalists is in the hands of the Congress. They will soon vote on whether to grant an addition of $7.5 million for the project in the 2020 budget, as many human rights organizations demand.
In other news, thousands of people in Sudan have been left homeless after torrential rains caused the Nile River to burst its banks and flood surrounding areas. Rains have battered the country since the first week of July, killing more than 50 people and injuring almost 100 others across the country. The floods have also disrupted the provision of essential services such as water and electricity, raising fears of an outbreak of waterborne diseases such as cholera and typhoid.
All the houses have been destroyed. Nothing remains. We were unable to collect our furniture. The houses of 2 widows and a married woman have been destroyed. It is the first time we are in this camp for displaced people, and it is the first time in our lives such floods happen. We only ask for one thing. We only ask for our right to have a place to stay.
Thousands of people have fled Cameroon's Anglophone regions, fearing a new wave of violent clashes between separatist forces and government troops. More than 40 people were killed over the weekend during clashes between the two groups. The recent violence comes a few days after the separatists' leaders, 10 of them, were sentenced to life imprisonment by a military court. The separatists, who are fighting for an independent state, accuse the Francophone majority government of discriminating against Anglophone regions.
We have just heard that there will be a lockdown, and since the children need to go to school, that's why we are moving down, so that the children can go to school.
What is causing me to go out is about the lockdown that is coming up, and we know that the town will not be too good, so I'm going to Barbados to maybe stay there for a while before coming back.
Dozens of journalists in Guinea have protested against what they say is harassment of private media practitioners by state authorities. The demonstration follows the arrest and detention of 2 journalists on charges of defamation relating to a Facebook post. The protesting journalists said the arrest of their colleagues is an attempt to intimidate them from carrying out their work.
The freedom of the press is threatened, and it looks like they want to silence journalists. Why should we feel threatened while doing our job? We are rebelling against that, and we are standing up before it's too late, because now it's the time to act.
The Democratic Republic of Congo has announced the members of the new coalition government. The announcement comes after 7 months of negotiations, and it follows President Felix Tshisekedi's victory over Joseph Kabila in the general election earlier this year. Most members of the new government have been drawn from the former president's Common Front for Congo party. The DRC will now have a woman vice prime minister, minister for foreign affairs, and minister for planning. January's election resulted in the first peaceful transition of power since the nation gained independence from Belgium in 1960.
The government is finally here. The President of the Republic, the head of state, has finally signed the order. Now that the government has been formed, we'll get to work shortly.
African delegates at the ongoing China-Africa Think Tanks Forum have hailed the role China is playing in the social and economic transformation of the continent. African Union representative Rahamtala El-Noor said Beijing has played a vital role in the development of big infrastructure and energy projects across the continent. China has invested more than $300 billion in Africa since 2009, when it took over from the United States as the continent's biggest trading partner.
The continuous support of China makes us confirm that our strategic partnership is based on shared values and mutual respect. This is why I'm convinced that China-Africa partnership is bringing various advantages to the two sides.
When it comes to the effort that Africa will have to make to achieve its structural transformation, each country will have to draw on its character, its own strength, history, and culture. The partnership between Africa and China contributes to create a world that allows more choices, basically more freedom.
After the break, Iran's president says Donald Trump only wants a photo op, not easy intentions. Stay with us.
Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transformed the world today. On Monday, only on Venezuela.
Thank you for joining us again. The president of Iran says the United States should take the first step in improving relations by lifting sanctions against Tehran, one day after the U.S. president said he was open to a meeting. Hassan Rouhani added that the key for change is in the hands of Washington, as Iran had already ruled out ever doing what worries the U.S. the most, building an atomic bomb.
If honestly this is your only concern, this has already been removed, so take the first step. Without this step, this lock will not be unlocked. The step is to retreat from sanctions. You must stop all illegal, unjust and wrong sanctions against the nation of Iran. If you lift all sanctions, bow to the Iranian nation, then there would be a different situation.
Rouhani also dismissed the idea of meeting U.S. President Donald Trump, referring to it as a simple photo op.
We are looking to solve the issues and the problems via reasonable methods, but we are not interested in taking photos. If someone demands a photograph with Hassan Rouhani, that is impossible. It is possible using Photoshop, but not possible in real life, unless they stop all their cruel sanctions and respect the rights of the Iranian nation, in which case we would consider it under those conditions.
And after visiting the G7 summit, Iran's foreign minister has traveled to China to hold talks about countering unilateralism. Our correspondent Alina Duarte has more.
Following his surprise visit to the G7 summit in Biarritz, France, the Iranian Foreign Minister arrived in Beijing to hold talks with the Chinese counterpart. Zarif said Iran and China need to join forces to counter unilateralism and contempt for international law, though Zarif didn't mention the United States directly during his meeting with Wang Yi, but he seemed to be referring to the Trump administration. Zarif highlighted that unilateralism is on the rise, and that rejection of the international law, not just lack of respect for international law, but in fact contempt for international law, is on the rise and we need to work together. He also said he planned to tell Wang Yi about the latest developments as well as his tour of Europe and his discussion in Biarritz with his French colleagues over the nuclear agreement. On the sidelines of the G7 summit, the Iranian foreign minister also met with German, British and French diplomats. In his opening remarks to the meeting, Wang said that facing this situation, China, as a responsible country, agrees to work with Iran and other countries together for multilateralism, the basic rules of international politics, and uphold the rightful interests of each country.
Our correspondent Alina Duarte. In other news, the chief executive of Hong Kong, Carrie Lam, has urged rioters to stop using violent tactics. Lam said that the region's government will resort to lawful measures to restore social order.
Violence is not a solution to any problems, and the action should not be glorified or legalized. We will not use force to de-escalate the problem. We will use legal procedures. Hopefully, Hong Kong will return to peace as soon as possible. That will help us start a dialogue and look into the problems in depth.
Thousands staged rallies in several towns in West Papua, Indonesia, against ethnic discrimination and demanding independence. Protesters wore full traditional indigenous regalia, carrying 4 Morning Star flags, which have been banned by the Indonesian government. Protests have become common in Papua and West Papua, but are usually shut down quickly by security forces who regard them as an illegal movement. The resource-rich West Papua was a Dutch colony that was incorporated into Indonesia after a widely criticized United Nations-backed referendum back in 1969.
I think the Indonesian President Joko Widodo is misguided that Papuans don't want development, infrastructure or welfare. But Indonesia is a large nation with so many races and tribes and should address the root problem.
And with that, we end our news brief, but you can find all of our stories by checking our website, telesurenglish.net. And be sure to join us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.
A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis, and induces criticism.